Hey everybody, welcome to Geeksvana Live. Thank you very much for joining me on this Sunday stream. I feel almost slightly nervous to press the go live button yes, that was a little bit odd there. We're not entirely sure what happened. Pressed to go live as normal, as I normally do, with great confidence. It went live for about 2 seconds and then came back off air again. But hey, once I came back on live, everything seems to be working now, although I'm probably, touch wood, I'm probably tempting things there, but there we go. But again, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you all for coming along to the second stream of the evening, technically, ever so technically. Yes, your screen stream is still showing the old one. Yes, indeed. Yeah, but the all of that will update. We've set the old one to private, and in fact actually deleted it, so it should disappear from everybody's lists as well, and you should get a new one for this one, a new update for this one, notification, etc. So okay, tonight this is going to be an interesting show tonight, and I've been looking forward to this one all day. Is probably the wrong way of putting it, because we have somebody within our community who is under a lot of stress at the moment, and you know, this has the potential to impact someone's family deeply, so I think we need to keep that in mind whilst we're discussing this evening. But tonight we're going to be looking at and discussing a drone flight made by a US drone pilot over a lake in New York. The difference here to many FPV videos online that we've all seen showing flights over water and across lakes is that this flight has led to the pilot, Paul Brown, to be prosecuted for reckless endangerment. Now, we have to unpack a lot on this show tonight, including looking at who polices our skies, whether the flight is indeed dangerous, the impact of this on the pilot and his life, and much more. Now, please remember, whilst Paul himself is more than willing to stand and defend his flight, in inverted commas, there is a human being and a family behind this story. So let's just keep that in mind whilst we're talking about this tonight. So to begin, let us first take a look at the drone flight in question. Paul has kindly permitted Geeksvana to play this out to you. The audio is from the DJI FPV drone that he was flying. We've not added any music to it or anything. And as you will see, there's no edits, etc. We'll be back with a bit more of the story behind this straight after the video. Okay, so that's the video as provided by Paul, and Paul is in the chat as Wedgenbig username this evening as well. And that is the video. He isn't sort of trying to hide it or anything else like that. He's looking in terms of a conversation, looking in terms of being open about what actually happened there. Now, whilst I play this again and play this muted over the top, just to give you another view of it, I'm just going to give you some of the words from Paul's statement on the situation. So, on August 13th, 2022, I was on vacation with my fiance and 2 children at Lake George in New York. I'm a drone pilot, and I was flying my drone legally over the waters of Lake George. A harbour patrol boat approached me and told me that what I was doing was too close to the water and that I had to fly higher. I'm well aware of the rules and regulations when flying a drone, as I'm a student of the Pilot Institute. I explained to the officer that I was following the rules and not violating any laws by flying close to the water. The officer got extremely upset and yelled, "You need to fly higher or I'm going to write you a ticket." I explained to the officer that I did not believe he could write me a ticket for flying close to the water. The officer parked his boat and approached me. I tried explaining to the officer that my flight was legal and I was not violating any laws, but he did not have any interest in hearing what I had to say. He spent the next half hour on the phone with his supervisor trying to figure out what he could write on the ticket. The officer charged me with a misdemeanor offence of New York Penal Code 120.20, reckless endangerment in the 2nd degree. On my first court date, I requested that future court hearings be held virtually or at a closer venue, as I am disabled and have severe mobility issues. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires state and local governments to allow me a reasonable accommodation due to my disability. The New York State Unified Court System has a policy in place stating that I am entitled to such an accommodation due to my disability. The judge in this case denied both requests and did not follow proper procedure in his denial of my rights. I've not committed any crime. I followed all laws required during my flight. My flight was heavily focused on safety, but I will require legal representation to let the truth be heard in this court. I cannot do that without your help. This is going on to Paul's GoFundMe, which we'll come on to in a moment. This court is comparing my aircraft in flight to bullets fired from a gun and rocks thrown from a hand. While it may sound absurd, this is the language that is being used against me by the prosecution in this case. They're doing so to avoid the jurisdiction of the FAA, the sole entity that controls all airspace in the United States of America. If I lose this case, I face a 1-year jail sentence. That would be devastating for my family and myself. So that's Paul's statement. That's the flight. I'm going to come to the chat in a little bit and just have a look at what people are saying. But we've got a few more things to unpack here, a few more things that I want to say as well, a few observations that I have, and really look at this from a holistic point of view. Because again, you've heard Paul's words there. But Paul isn't running away from this. Paul is more than happy to have this debate, he feels, with the correct authorities, essentially. If the FAA want to have this debate with him, that's more akin to what he feels should be happening. Now, personally, I would not make that flight, personally. I would also have not flown around the police boat, although, of course, identifying it as a police boat at the time might have been slightly difficult. We have the addition that it doesn't help that the DJI FPV drone is a loud beast. This is a loud drone. I personally take extra steps when flying that particular drone, which is obviously pictured here behind me, as I'm aware that it obviously would be terrible if it did come into contact with a soft target. In fact, I released a live show when it was released with along with Ian in London, another British content creator, talking about the specific dangers we felt that particular drone posed, which, especially as it was DJI's first FPV drone, the type of people that might be flying it and that type of thing. So, which was an interesting live show, to put it mildly. Now, that's my personal opinion as an experienced drone pilot, but one with limited experience of FPV. For me, I would risk assess the situation and deem it to either fly higher or to take a course completely around the boats, etc., which in itself poses an interesting point, because I, and I'm sure others, would not make this flight in the same way for our own reasons following a risk assessment. It doesn't mean that there was anything wrong with Paul's flight at all. just because I would do it differently or I wouldn't do it, doesn't actually necessarily, automatically make this a dangerous flight or a flight that shouldn't happen. It doesn't mean that the flight is anything but legal. We all have different outlooks and attitudes to risk, and that is why we have drone regulations and guidance from the airspace regulator. Put my teeth in tonight, which gives us a benchmark. It gives us rules to follow, which we should therefore create a safe and reliable platform for us to base our flights from. So essentially, really what I'm saying there is that with the FAA and the CAA here in the UK and the IATA across Europe, the idea, whether or not they reach that benchmark or not, but the idea is that it's supposed to be a platform of regulation to ensure that if you follow those regulations, then aviation is safe, be that drone or manned aviation, manned or unmanned, crewed or uncrewed, should I say rather. So the other thing to bear in mind here is that Paul is not some reckless yob who sticks two fingers up to authorities and flies however he wants to. Anyone who watches his live shows on YouTube and hears him talk about drones and life in general will see, in my opinion, what is a good guy who's got a healthy approach and attitude towards the hobby. So there is no rebellious rule breaker, the FAA type of situation there whatsoever. Frankly, this is a very different situation to others that we have seen. Paul feels he followed the rules for drone flight set out by the FAA in the US and took several steps in terms of mitigation to try and ensure his flight was as safe as possible. This included something that many FPV flights does not include, which is an active spotter by his side. In fact, Paul is currently studying with Pilot Institute, a popular US drone educator, for his Part 107. So he isn't your stereotypical irresponsible flyer. I'm just going to put it up and rip and see what happens, in my opinion. So because I wouldn't personally take the flight, it doesn't mean it's against any regulation whatsoever. I'm not suggesting that. So why then does Paul find himself in the crosshairs of the legal system? Well, one of the things we need to look at here is the New York Penal Code itself. Now, Section 120.20, which is the penal code section that Paul received the citation, the ticket under, is reckless endangerment in the second degree. A person is guilty of reckless endangerment in the second degree when he recklessly engages in conduct which creates a substantial risk of serious injury to another person. Reckless endangerment in the second degree is a Class A misdemeanor. So there you have it. Reckless endangerment in the second. We are talking about here a person is guilty of reckless endangerment in the second degree when he recklessly engages in conduct which creates a substantial risk of serious physical injury to another person. So the harbour officer who ticketed Paul clearly felt that following complaints from water users, and I suppose as the drone did fly over their boat a couple of times from their own view of the flight, that the drone posed a substantial risk of physical injury flying at the height and speed that it was. Here we have something that I feel is going to become an issue on both sides of the pond, and I've talked about this before on my live shows, that drone users who feel their flights are safe and perfectly within airspace regulations set out by airspace regulators are being approached by law enforcement and potentially facing fines or proceedings based on non-airspace related regulations or laws. Now, this is a good point. This is a good point to mention that Paul is seeking the assistance of the community to raise funds for his defence. There's a link to his GoFundMe, which I'm going to put in the live chat right now. But it's also in the description following the show as well, with a couple of other links to the relevant information as well. So really what we're looking here, if you feel so inclined to head over and provide some financial support for Paul, who's currently seeking legal representation to fight this. If you do decide to support Paul, you'll not only be supporting a family man who is trying to get out from under this situation, but also helping to be part of deciding some important issues around drone flight in the US and deciding who can prosecute drone pilots and for what. The ability, this is one of the issues, the ability of the officer to provide the ticket is based on their perception of the risk to those in the water and on the ground. The penal code, of course, isn't limited to, and it doesn't automatically discount activities which are also covered under federal regulations. So I don't think we have a preemption issue in this particular scenario. The officer can write the citation for any act deemed potentially harmful to the public at large. Besides the FAA regulations, the local city can charge under reckless endangerment with respect to aircraft operation, especially in this instance where they feel it is not in conflict with the FAA's authority. So it will be a legal battle to decide whether or not New York authorities should prosecute the drone pilot over the flight. Of course, in the middle of this, as I say, is Paul and his family. So really what we want to see happen here is the best possible outcome for him. So if you are able to pop along to that page, please to give. Paul has, as many would have moved to dismiss. He's actually had a court order to dismiss this over the fact that only federal authorities can regulate his operation of a drone. The response that came back was again an interesting one. And this again is coming back across from the prosecution. In response to the defendant's assertions that only the federal government can regulate his operation of his drone, the people argue that the defendant's reasoning is simply mistaken and illogical. If a person were to fire a bullet at another person in Bolton Landing, the bullet's flight through the air would not be then considered to be under the authority of the Federal Aviation Authority. If a person were to throw a rock at another person in Bolton Landing and injure them, again, the rock's flight through the air would not then be considered to be under the authority of the Federal Aviation Authority. Those actions would be considered criminal and would be under the jurisdiction and authority of the criminal justice system of either Bolton Town Court or Warren County Court in the state of New York. So essentially they're talking about the bullets or the rock traveling across the lines there. This is to me, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but it's a strange statement and an argument that can really be easily torn to shreds. Comparing the flight of a drone, which is something which is absolutely covered by federal regulations and therefore falls under the purview of the federal government, to a rock or the flight of the bullet is somewhat bizarre. I understand what the writer of the text is really getting at with this, but it really only shows that they do not understand the situation or the concept of regulated drone flight. It's frankly, it's very poorly written, in my opinion. And it does, as I say, it really does show that they don't understand necessarily with what actually they're dealing with here. Now, my issue is that with more and more flights happening across the US, we're going to see more issues like this happening. Drones are increasingly popular, and with releases like the DJI FPV drone and the DJI Avata, drone pilots are probably going to come into contact with more of the public and populated situations. That actually makes this case more important in terms of the wider hobby and industry in the US. So we need to help Paul get a resolution here to this and not see a dangerous situation occur, which not necessarily sets any kind of legal precedent because of the levels that we're talking here, but more than certainly would set an example for others to follow. And I think the confidence that a successful prosecution would give other counties, other states might be an issue there. This also brings into the conversation how we as drone pilots survive interactions with the police, both sides of the pond. I've put out a video personally focused on this, which was called How Not to Get Arrested Flying Your Drone, to get through the interaction and be able to walk away. Raising a complaint afterwards is really how I look at things. Others would say we should look to educate the officer or, stand and make our point and see it as an issue of rights. And that again is a personal decision to make. But personally, I would always recommend, in my opinion, backing down, taking the details of the officer, and then following up and actually making a complaint afterwards from the safety of your home, the legal safety of that situation as well. It's very difficult to do that, and I completely understand for all sorts of reasons why people would want to educate the officer, and I see this often posted. I see this often posted by people within the industry, people within the hobby as well, saying no, you should stand, you should debate this with the officer, and you should let them know what the rules are. But if you've got someone if you've got an authority figure in front of you that's not listening, you need to get yourself out of that situation, frankly, as soon as humanly possible. Live to fight another day and raise a complaint. That's just my personal opinion. It's my personal advice. So that does bring me onto an important point and a discussion of Paul and his situation. Now, he is the worst possible self-promoter for his GoFundMe because he's not someone who sits with his hat out or finds this kind of thing to be easy to ask for. He is overly keen not to be seen as someone asking for cash from the drone industry, from the drone community. However, if you are able and minded to support Paul in this situation, please do so. I've got a feeling, depending on how things go, that his goal that he set of $5,000 is actually considerably light of where he might find the legal costs coming in this case. His GoFundMe is again in the live chat, which I will post again very quickly, and will be linked in the description for anybody that's watching this on the replay. So those are the points that I wanted to raise on this. Let's have a quick look in the live chat before we move on to the next section and see what you guys, what the drone community, as it were, is saying. And again, thank you everybody for coming across from the other failed stream. I'm not entirely sure what happened there. GMI Visuals, Jason says, I've heard about this one before. What a load of bow locks. Outrageous. This was an excellent flight, nothing reckless and not endangering anyone. Andy Cortez says something which I agree with. I've seen much more reckless flights posted on YouTube daily, and I agree with that, because no matter what, as I say, I personally wouldn't have flown in that way, but just because I wouldn't have flown, everyone's risk assessment, I think we have to remember that as a community as well, when we're sat back and judging people for flying, etc., that we have to remember that everybody's perception is different. It doesn't mean that it's blatantly breaking regulations or anything else like that. But yeah, I mean, I've seen flights daily on YouTube. Obviously, this was actually an interaction with an officer at the scene, so it's slightly different. It's not as if they've prosecuted based on the video, but yeah, indeed, you can clearly see Paul making changes to his altitude, his flight path, etc., to minimise the risk. Mike Drennan says, I agree, too close to the boats, just agree with the officer and respect other people enjoying their boats, recreation. And yeah, I mean, that's, but again, absolutely, Mike, we agree on that, but it's kind of, it's one of those things where I think that we have to respect that not everybody's going to do things the same way. And that in itself doesn't mean that they're breaking the law. And it also doesn't mean that they should end up with a citation and a potential year's sentence for it as well. XJet, hey, I'm supposed to be the outlaw and the rule breaker here, but I think this flight was ill-advised. Yeah, as I say, Bruce, it is one that personally I wouldn't done. I wouldn't have taken. Jonathan Jackson says that's a bunch of bulls. Johnny DRC, one of our hardcore FPVers, says this is bull, and then very kindly takes out the I to stop the anti-swear triggering there. FlySky Drone's asking what were the rules flying over the water. Well, there's no special rules, etc. there, Tony. It's good to see you, by the way. And it's really, this is one of those situations where it really does need testing. And my issue is, and I agree an awful lot when I hear people saying, with my channel, I talk about the rules. There's no hiding the fact that I follow the rules when I fly my drones. I believe in the current regulation system here in the UK. I think it is actually pretty fair. And yeah, I have respect for the regulations that are in place and everything else like that. However, it's really a case of how you're going to actually adapt each and every flight, and realizing that actually you can be following every single rule. For instance, here in the UK, you can be following the drone code 100%, but actually then fall foul of something like Article 241. Legwork saying the only real issue is people on boats can't get out of the way if the drone went bad and was getting awfully close at points. Hawkwind Droneworks, police harassment. The officer failed to de-escalate the situation. The prosecutor is out of his mind and over-exaggerating the potential dangers. Now, you see, this is one of my things. Now, this drone is a scary beast. It's 900 grams. Those props are very, very strong. It is a beast of a thing that if it did hit someone or hit something, it is a, especially at those kind of speeds, it is a beast. But I do feel like there was an escalation there from the officer's point of view, and whether or not that was purely from the situation of, almost saying to the officer, okay, this is the situation, now come get me. I'm not sure if that's the way the harbour officer took it. He clearly didn't want to discuss, clearly didn't want to learn anything from Paul, learn anything from the drone pilot. So yeah, it's an interesting one. And actually on different points of this, on that line, I sort of hover on both sides of it. So that in itself, and exactly as you're saying, as far as the prosecutor is exaggerating the potential dangers, I think that's one of my issues with this as well, is that as we've seen it with where this was posted on Facebook and on other social platforms, where people are saying, I wouldn't have carried out that flight. Others have said that was a dangerous flight, etc. But I don't think it's that far across the line. I don't think it's that far across the line that somebody should be automatically be prosecuted for something like reckless endangerment. I think that is obviously a life-changing situation. Mad's Tech, Ian, good to see you. Mad is live after us at 10 p.m. So everybody head across to him afterwards. The flight is not terrible. However, it was closer than I would like to the people stroke traffic on the water. I can imagine it rattling a few people on the water. They're having looks. Yeah, and I agree with you there, Ian. I think, and that's where I sort of stand on it as well, is that it is a noisy drone as well, the FPV drone. You know, if you did that with the Avata, they probably wouldn't have even heard the thing. But it is a very difficult situation, because I always say whenever I hear people saying, oh, you need to challenge people, you need to educate officers that you come across, that type of thing. And I've seen that even in Paul's posts online, where people are, and posts from other people, where they're then saying, actually, you need to stand up and educate people. And I always say to that, and you know, civil disobedience against rules that you don't like or something like that, I always say to that, are you going to be the person that stands next to the guy when they're in court, or when they need to pay their mortgage that month, when they have a criminal conviction and they can no longer do the job that they currently do, etc., and the life-changing implications that can have. One of the reasons why I don't like that kind of sentiment personally though. Have drone will fly. Would it help in saying that an ultralight airplane, or even a power parachute, a paraglider, would be allowed to do the same exact thing? Indeed. Legwork, that said, the officer Krupke didn't like to be told he was wrong, and I think that was a big part of it, Bill. Genuinely, I do think that was a big part of it. Let me just play the muted version whilst I'm going through some of these. Jonathan Jackson, he needs to get the FAA involved. This is bull. Well, interestingly, Jonathan, it isn't something that's a very particularly easy thing to do. The FAA don't actively get involved in any local or state prosecutions of this type. So it's unlikely that you would actually see the FAA step forward to talk about this even. XJet, just because you can do something, it doesn't mean you should, legally, in brackets. Yeah, absolutely, which we have spoken about on this channel an awful lot. But again, I want to come back again to the thing that it's a situation where I think we would all agree where this is not crazy. We're not sat here looking at a guy flying over a stadium, or, you know, flying at a crowd of people on Thanksgiving shopping, or some of the crazy stuff that we have seen online. This is nothing like that. This is just a flight that some of us would take, and some of us have probably done worse, and that some of us wouldn't take, which is why I feel that I'm still happy to share the GoFundMe link, because I think Paul needs the support of the community. I think that the fact that this is being dealt with via the state, via this penal code, I think that's an issue, and I think it's an issue that could affect more and more drone flyers as we go on. Madstech is just following up saying, I'm not saying it's illegal, but it could be argued potentially dangerous in the UK. Yep, they would do you under Article 241. It's like not speeding, but driving in a manner that could cause an accident. And absolutely, the Article 241 here in the UK, although it would be actually quite difficult to prosecute a pilot, a drone flyer, under Article 241 in the UK, that is a catch-all that basically says, even though you're following all the rest of the rules, the single most important thing, the catch-all, is that you must be flying absolutely safety. Johnny DRC is saying that the police are dumbasses, which was removed by moderator, but I don't think that's a particularly heinous one to say there. XJet, we have to remember that we are all ambassadors for the hobby. Every individual's actions reflects on the entire community of flyers. There is a responsibility we need to take seriously. But you see, I agree with that, Bruce. As you know, I'm of that mindset. And the other thing I want to make clear as well is that Paul is not looking to necessarily say that what he did was correct or wrong or anything else like that. He's more annoyed over who is and how they're coming at him. He's more than happy to have this debate with the FAA and for them to come to him and say, hey, this drone flight, etc., because he feels he was within their regulations. So yeah, It's something that, yeah, every individual's actions reflects on the entire community. Flies a responsibility we need to take seriously. I agree with that, but I also want to see the swell and the upsurge of, you know, if you are confronted, if there is an officer that doesn't know the rules, it's your job to teach them those rules, etc. It's not. It is absolutely not. If they're doing something wrong, I completely understand that. We do not want our rights trodden on. We do not want overzealous police officers getting things wrong. But at that point, when you realise that this officer is not going to back down, when you realise a police officer is not going to back down, please walk away and live to fight another day. Take their details, write a complaint, do it that way round. I know we all feel the answer to that will be sure, nothing will happen, etc. I understand that. But in this instance, it clearly shows that some officers, wherever they are in the world, do not want to be told that they are wrong, do not want to learn. And Paul himself is saying, my point to the cop was that if he took issue with my flight, he could report me to the FAA but not ticket me. And you see, this is part of the situation as well. We've just had a range of videos here in the UK with our national police counter drone unit, and we've talked about this kind of thing an awful lot in the live streams with them and in the follow-up videos, and there's more videos in that series to come out, some of them coming out this week. But you are still subject to the laws of the land, as it were. So in this instance, where an officer is citing you for 102.20, the reckless endangerment, it is something which is going to happen more and more. I believe here in the UK and across the pond, we're going to see this happening more and more, which is also why it's important perhaps the community does support Paul in terms of donations for his legal fund. Stevie Boy FPV, that seemed like a rip for away from the public, to be honest. There were many moments where if it failed, harm to uninvolved people was possible. 50-meter separation was not obeyed, and it screams, which scares people. You see, it's interesting actually, Stevie Boy. I believe you're UK based, and this is of course is over in the US, which they don't have the 50-meter separation. Which for our US viewers here in the UK, once you're above 250 grams, there is a 50-meter rule for uninvolved people. To get closer, you have to take qualifications and have specific authorizations and that type of thing. Or if you're flying sub 250, as my t-shirt says here, they can be flown in towns and even over people. So we have the sort of two-tier regulation system essentially here in the UK for sub 250 and over 250. Jason GMI Visuals is asking if XJet, XJet, you've been kidnapped for the real XJet. But that's the thing, though, you see, and I think people misunderstand Bruce. I think people misunderstand XJet to be a one-dimensional character of, you know, screw the establishment, screw the rules. And as he says, I've always had the perspective that we should fly safely. Some rules alone don't provide that safety, and some rules are just a joke. And that's the thing, I think, and that's why Bruce has been on the channel with me. That's why I'm always happy to have a debate and a conversation with Bruce, because although we come at things from different perspectives and different ends of the spectrum in terms of drone regulation, it is something that actually we agree on in terms of the flight needs to be safe. And I often find myself agreeing with Bruce far more than I'd ever possibly actually fully admit whilst I'm awake, perhaps. Ian Simpson, hi, good to see you. In the UK, I think the police will bump their gums but not do anything if nothing's wrong. But once something does go wrong, then someone is going to get stomped on from a very great height. Yeah, and that's very much the feeling that I get both from regulator and law enforcement, Ian. I agree with you in the UK that they're much more looking for something that's actually happened. And if something happens, someone is hurt, properties damaged, that type of thing, then they'll go back and look at the mitigations. Then they'll go back and look at the flight safety, look at the drone, look at the pilot, look at every single part of it, frankly. And as you say, stomp on them from a very great height. Mike Drennan, officer asks to fly higher or he will get a ticket. Argues with officer, wants to buzz close to boats, now has ticket. Yeah, I don't believe another flight took place. I don't believe that Paul, and Paul, you can confirm this in the chat, I don't believe that Paul actually went back out. This was all interaction once he landed, as you saw in the video there. Stuart DB D89, good to see you. Hope you're well. it's scary that you can't see why that was dangerous. He flew meters above a woman standing on a paddleboard. Yeah, I think, as I'm saying, this is not a flight that I would have taken personally. This isn't a flight that I would have carried out in terms of where I feel it would have passed my risk assessment. I can see how it would have passed other people's risk assessment. I think the one paddleboarder there, I can, again, direct flight over one paddleboarder, arguably. I'm not entirely sure that it's 100%, but yeah, I certainly personally, as I said many times now on the stream, personally, I wouldn't have done that. So I'm not necessarily saying that I don't see it as dangerous, but I certainly don't see this as something like the worst FPV video I've ever seen or anything like that. And Bruce also follows up with, even I, a very seasoned flyer, often feel more than a little uncomfortable when a 5-inch freestyle drone buzzes past at just a few meters. And I think that's the thing here. I think there is probably a learning curve for both sides here, but I honestly believe that this isn't a situation where Paul should be subjected to this level of prosecution, in my opinion. We look at situations where how the FAA would probably deal with this, and how other flyers have been dealt with through the educations and warning system. I think that's much more likely what possibly would have happened here. Alexia also says, I'm sure Paul could have de-escalated the situation if he'd acknowledged the cops' concerns. People have a right not to feel endangered, even if the danger isn't as much as they think. And I think that's an interesting thing, because as I keep saying, this is a beast of a drone. I'm pointing to it here in the cage in case you're wondering why I'm sticking my finger in the air aimlessly. But this is a beast of a drone. When it gets going, it's a scary old sounding beast, frankly. And I think that it is a difficult situation, and I think that the way the public would react to that flying, I know when I've flown it in local parks, I'm now very, very careful about where I actually fly it. Mainly, nothing to do necessarily with anything that I think it's a dangerous drone or anything else like that. Although it is a hard piece of kit to hit something or somebody with. It's more the noise. It's more the sort of the way people sit up when they hear it taking off and zipping through the air. Yeah, it is there. GM Drones, Gerard, good to see you. Hey, Sean, sorry I'm late. Well, Gerard, that's disgusting. And Paul's saying here, I agree with some that I could have handled the situation with the cop better, but my flight was legal. Yeah, I mean, I have, but yeah, and Paul, you are a great guy, because you've allowed us to share all of this. You're not hiding from this situation, etc. But yeah, I think that from the advice that I give, which possibly comes at things from a slightly different angle, to a lot of creators out there, and to a lot of commentators rather than creators out there, that I would rather fight to live another day. And I don't always necessarily see that incident, that situation has to be won versus the police officer. And as Xjet saying, again, legal doesn't mean right. We argue that the rules are a bad fit for the hobby, and that works both ways. You can do bad things without breaking the rules. Droning West Australia, good to see you. It could be argued there was the possibility that the drone could have hit someone or a boat, as he did pass extremely close to others. However, I think it's been hard done by. Yeah, and I think that as somebody was saying before, that I think perhaps we are talking about, again, I'll bring up the code again in a second, but it's a fairly specific thing, and I don't think that the strong likelihood of where the drone would have ended up in most of these situations will be plonking in the water. I can say 100 times it's not a flight I would take personally, but in most scenarios. But we are talking about a situation here where the Penal Code section 120.20 actually states that a person is guilty of reckless endangerment in the second degree when he recklessly engages in conduct which creates a substantial risk of serious physical injury to another person. So to me, there's kind of like a staircase there. So they are guilty of reckless endangerment when he recklessly engages in conduct with a substantial risk of serious physical injury to another person. So I'm not entirely convinced that this goes up those stairs. I think this incident stops somewhere, because there is that whole side of things that where Paul has taken steps to learn the rules, know the rules, that type of thing. But I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying either, Drone in West Australia. KPV is saying it wouldn't have got past CPS over here. Yeah, no, I would probably agree with that. And Paul is just confirming that yes, he had already landed and was putting gear away, so he wasn't actually looking to. It's not as if he was switching batteries and saying, "Screw you, copper. I'm gonna do the same again." Stuart D89 says common sense must always be used if the rules allow it. I don't fly FPV near or over any people. If it hits them, it's going to be very nasty. Now, this is not this next part that I want to say actually, which Stuart reminds me of, is nothing to do with Paul as an individual, nothing to do with Paul as a pilot. So this isn't directed towards him, but this is actually someone who is a camera drone flyer at heart, an experienced camera drone flyer. You give me anything from a Mini 3 upwards and up to the big boys, and I can fly that thing 100%. I know that, hey, you guys in FPV with your acro mode, I've been looking at this saying you don't actually fly. You press some sticks on something that flies itself, which fine. But I have my skill set within that. When I then move across to FPV and these drones, which are sold to me as easy to use, sold to me as a gateway into FPV, to me, I'm not 100% sure that the wrong people end up flying those drones. I've been very, very careful how I self-regulate myself to fly the DJI FPV drone in particular. I almost feel like they should have actually swapped the releases around. I think the Avata should have come out first, because actually, to me, that's a lot safer aircraft to fly for a inexperienced FPV pilot, even in manual mode, because obviously prop cards and everything else like that. I do feel like this, and I said it at the time in the live stream with Ian in London, that I don't think that was necessarily a particularly responsible thing to throw at the camera community. The Mojek, great to see you. I personally think it was a bit close for comfort in places, but that doesn't mean it wasn't safe. Definitely think it should be involving the FAA and see what they say. I hope this is solved. Indeed, I agree with you. But when you get text like this thrown back at you, which again, as I say, I understand the point they're trying to make, but Paul is going to require some representation to be able to fight against this type of thought process, where they are very strategically attempting to keep it very much out of the FAA's remit, frankly. And XJet also saying flying low wasn't the problem. I saw flying too close to uninvolved third parties who might have felt endangered. Yeah, and that's actually a good point as well, Bruce. And we have that here in the UK as well, of causing concern, causing rise to concern, which is something which is becoming a bit more of a hot topic. As Jason says, it's not a bullet, it's not a rocket, it's a recreational drone flight. Yeah, exactly. And Stuart saying yes, that will cut you up without any problems. And Paul himself saying again in the chat, I was approached after I landed. I was just trying to explain to the officer that he has recourse to report me without ticketing me. And I understand, Paul, I understand. We've had a great chat on Messenger. I support getting you the right representation. And I feel the community, I do feel like this could have happened to so many people. Because I don't see you as some renegade, as some rebel of the community or anything. So I think this could have happened to so many people. What I do think has happened along the way is I think we do have a group, a supposed generation of drone pilots who feel not entitled. I wouldn't go as far as saying entitled, but feel they know the drone rules well enough that actually they can have that debate, and actually they can and shouldn't be necessarily challenged. And I do look to my fellow creators and the commentators out there on the industry and hobby to really look again at the type of messages that we're putting out in terms of, are we actually helping anybody? Are we actually helping people? Or are we just causing more confrontation and more issues like this, basically? XJet saying you should have claimed that. There you go. Jason, you're wondering where the real XJet had gone. He's back. You should have claimed it was an urgent pizza delivery. And BB Junkie 1023, good to see you. Precedent has already been set by FAA. They've prosecuted drone pilots, so they are covered by federal law. Yeah, absolutely. And but this is one of the crunch points here that I want the audience to take away from this as well. That you are not only exposing yourself to the laws of aviation wherever you are flying, whether it's the UK, EU, or in the United States, in those areas in particular, you're not only exposing yourself to aviation law. Because you are flying a drone doesn't mean they can't touch you in terms of general law and penal code and specific law, etc. It just simply doesn't mean that. So we need to be aware of what we're doing in terms of it actually having other legal ramifications for us. So Legwork is saying, why not just say that you'd take his advice under consideration for the next time? Yeah, as Paul said, he thinks he may have handled it differently. It doesn't have to be dangerous to cause anxiety and fear for those nearby. We need to remember and respect that. And that's the other point that I'm talking about in terms of having these drones in the hands of people like myself who are camera drone flyers and suddenly coming across into the world of FPV, that FPV as a hobby is extremely safe. But it's a hobby that's extremely safe because people have to build these drones, they have to learn how to fly them, that type of thing. And also you tend to have much more of a model aircraft type of community feeling to things. So you have things like pits where you ensure that you don't turn power things on, and everyone's making sure they're not on each other's frequencies. And there's so many safety protocols. There's so much safety built into FPV as a hobby and sport that I think it's avoided the headlines. I think it's avoided issues like this, mainly because of the type of people that are therefore flying it, because they've gone through those steps. So actually they have a real genuine understanding. And again, this isn't aimed specifically at Paul, but yeah, I do think that there is a different generation of FPV pilot coming into it. Andrew asking, do I think there's a case to win here for Paul? I'm not a legal advisor. I'm trying to bring this story to the community to see what people think, and it's interesting that I share the views on both sides of the coin. I feel that I think any kind of harshness here, I'm not entirely sure why a prosecutor hasn't looked at this and said, okay, it's flying, at the end of the day, it's flying a little drone. It's not the best flight in the world, but actually it also isn't the worst thing in the world. And why there hasn't been a coming together, and why there hasn't been a resolution, which is really what I would say, rather than Paul necessarily winning this case. I think there needs to be a resolution, personally speaking, rather than anybody winning it. Ian Simpson says, this is getting similar to lawyers loving to be paid for debating if Pringles are crisps or potato snacks, or Jaffa cakes are biscuits or cakes. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And XJet saying, I very rarely fly when uninvolved people are around, and if they are, I fly slowly and quietly. Never had a problem doing that. And as Paul's just answering Legwork there, saying he was trying to avoid getting the ticket. Mark's Escapades, good to see you, sir. Hope you're well. Saying a spotter doesn't help you on any flight in reality. It's just another BS hoop to jump through. And Exit saying, I like pits. They're a much bigger target. Yeah, indeed. Johnny DRC saying, police are right, you're not, get used to it. I understand why you're getting that message, particularly from my channel in the last couple of weeks. But I don't think that's necessarily the point I would take away from this. It's more if things go too far and somebody ends up in Paul's situation, that's life-changing. That's a potentially life-changing situation, even in terms of the stress that the poor chap is going to have to go through in this, especially as they won't do things remotely due to his disability, etc. I think that really does need looking at, and certainly Paul requires representation here. But I don't necessarily think it's just the police are right, you're not, get used to it type of situation either, because there are ways and means to be able to get these situations looked at afterwards. FPV Freedom UK, good to see you. People coming into the hobby should be using simulators. Yeah, I agree. And I have actually started using a simulator very recently. So there you go. Flying low. What about in terms of flying speeds for UK-based pilots? Most FPVs can fly faster than the legal limits. Yeah, I think I know we have the magic 99 miles an hour over in the US, but I think here in the UK, in terms of speed of drones, etc., again, it's more about the context. It's more about what happens when it goes wrong. As somebody quite rightly pointed out in the chat earlier, it is here in the UK much more about that side of things, basically. We'll take a few more of your comments in the chat here. Heinrich, great to see you. Evening all. Enjoyed his flight. Was thinking when the head on and then it landed. A bit risky though. Just my thoughts. Yeah, and but that's really where I sit. I wouldn't have taken this flight, and it wouldn't have passed my risk assessment 100%. But I also don't think that we're dealing with somebody here who's a completely reckless idiot within the community, of which there are many, many videos. And I know it's about timing, and it's about getting caught for it. And he had the misfortune that one of the boats that he was flying around was actually one of the police boats. So it is about timing. It is about wrong place, wrong time, etc. as well. But I don't think that this should end up in that kind of situation personally. Okay. John Murph, good to see you. Haven't seen your name in the chat before, so I'll go to your comments. Sounds like just another typical ignorant police, the kind that likes to make up the rules as they go. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't smack me right when you end up with a situation with the police and authorities anywhere in the world where they are then, looking to find ways to get you. But unfortunately, that is the reality of things. Sometimes that is the reality of things. If you do annoy people, if you do annoy the police, they are going to try and do that kind of thing. They are going to come after you. But I understand what you're saying, John, completely. XChat says, time for the XChat dealing with the police video, how to respond, what size of firearm to carry, etc., etc. I'd actually pay money to watch that one on your Patreon, actually, Bruce. And Dinah Jones saying it may be more that they don't know the hobby as we do and need to learn more about it. Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think we need to realise here as well, is that as others have pointed out in the chat tonight, this is a situation where I'm trying to be careful with my words this evening, because we are dealing with a man and his family, and I don't think we're dealing with, a bank robber or some kind of crazed criminal here, or even crazed drone pilot in the community. I know far worse people that I could name right now, who are, in my opinion, irresponsible drone pilots. That is not Paul's attitude, but as many people have said in the chat tonight, you can be flying to the rules and still be unsafe. Flights can be legal, and you still shouldn't do it, and that is absolutely a fact, which I do agree with. Andy Cortez, our senior moderator, reminding me why he's my senior moderator, saying do the same flight in Iran and you'd have a totally different outcome. Well, yes, indeed. Old Fart and a GoPro says, just tuned in. Paul was flying too close to boats and bodyboards. Hi, good to see you, by the way, Old Fart. I hope you're well. Dronegrapher. Drone and Technic tutorials. Cool. I actually can't read your message because I think it's in German. I apologize. I long for a day when YouTube automatically translates people's comments in the live chat. That would be wonderful. Drone Shots is saying, like when state cops got my son's riding his motorcycle on the side of the railroad, federal space, he then got their arse burnt, just like airspace. And the before you fly said he could. I think autocorrect took some of your message away there, Jody. And Johnny Mac just reminding everybody he's been a member for 19 months of the Drone Club. Thank you, sir. BB Junkie 1023, if they can't get you to see the error of your ways by asking you to fly higher, then using their discretion and pushing a ticket that they would have otherwise not given is fair enough. Yeah, I mean, to me, as I say, I think it's very easy in hindsight. It's so easy after the fact to say, okay, I wouldn't have carried out that flight. Okay, first one. Okay, if approached by the officer and that happened, I would say, well, actually, I'm not going to be flying anymore. So, okay, fair enough. I'm out of here. I think you're wrong, but I'm out of here. Perhaps take his details if you then want to follow up and email him later to explain, providing some links, that type of thing. That's the way I would personally have looked to have educated the officer. But that, again, is my opinion. And that again is my opinion of really everything here, from the point of view that I think there's so much opinion based within this. Yeah. And XJet saying he thinks one of the boats was called the Karen. And Bannister posts, man, he was cruising. Not going to lie, looks so fun, but a bit close to people. Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I feel like if we all looked at every single flight that we take and that type of thing, then there is that inbuilt safety that hopefully most of us are using. And I think that really Bruce XJet probably put it the best in one of his comments, and it's something which I know many of us feel as well, that just because it's legal doesn't necessarily mean that the flight should have actually taken place. I'm just going to play the video one last time for anybody who's joined us late, and then we'll come back and just finish up on the comments in the chat. So yeah, and it's really interesting seeing people's comments in the chat actually, and it tells me a lot about where people sit on these type of things as well, which feeds my journalistic hunger as well. So thank you very much everyone that's taken time to share their thoughts on this, and I agree a lot with a lot of the comments made on both sides of this, because I think that it isn't necessarily a simple situation, but I still feel personally that I don't know whether or not what happened there climbs this particular staircase, and of course we're going to find that out in due course with the action that's happening. So if you do, I've put the link a few times in the chat. If you are minded, don't, not just necessarily if you agree with Paul's flight or not, but from the point of view of helping out somebody else within the community that needs the help at the moment. I believe the GoFundMe is actually doing pretty well at the moment, which is fantastic to see. Let's have a very quick flick across and have a look. That it's at 2,408. And in fact, it's gone up a bit more whilst we've been on air, which is fantastic to see. Of the 5,000 goal. Now, it's one of those goals that again, this is Paul not wanting to seem like he's got his hand out, etc. I feel like he's going to need more than that for this, potentially anyway, for this situation. Hopefully a good lawyer will be able to get in here and get this dealt with the prosecutor very, very quickly. But, you know, time will tell from that point of view. Just the last few of your comments. Grain Fullard, for breaking the law, for doing that isn't that bad. Bit close to boats and people, but everybody is risk assessment is different, and the officer should have given him a chance. And KPV asking XJet. So what you're saying is that you would just Matty flip the bridge. They'll know them. Bannister Post, good to see you. Yup, we had a new guy join our group and he was doing full throttle or around us, everybody uncomfortable, but when we did it to each other and have been flying for a while, it was fine. Yeah, it is that experience thing, as Bruce did say there further up, that people may not know that you're a good pilot, and I think we have to bear that in mind. We have to bear in mind the public's reaction to our drones, basically, because there are some very, very differing views in the comments this evening, which I also find very interesting. Tony saying, at this speed, how's the spotter going to see it? Well, yeah, I mean, I would argue that the pilot has probably got more perception, has probably got more situational awareness from inside the goggles, but that is one of the age-old debates as far as spotters, etc., are concerned. Mark's Escapade says, in the next episode, every airline pilot that has ever landed at St. Martin Airport is being retroactively sued for flying a 100-ton machine too close to people. Yeah, and XJet was saying, what if there had been a 747 flying down that river? It's only a matter of time. Yeah, and Mike Jenner, from the social responsibility side of things, makes a good point of one dude having a good time and annoying stroke scaring 20 other people having a good time, which I do agree with as well. And I think I've missed a comment from Paul himself further up because he's explaining something else. No, I don't think I have actually. Okay. Joseph Moylan Carter. Have I got your surname correct? £5 super chat. Thank you very much. I think drones as a hobby is complicated. I should have started badminton instead. GB, just kidding. Yeah, indeed. I know what you mean, but it's interesting because these are the kind of subject matters that I don't like to shy away from because I think the audience is going to go one way or another way. I also want to highlight the GoFundMe because whatever is happening here, Paul needs that assistance. Paul needs that help, and you know, I want to see a good family man get out from underneath this, frankly. But yes, it does feel that way sometimes. I do agree. Cotton FPV says, sounds to me Mr. Lawman didn't like the fact that someone knew the law better than him. Case closed. Let this man go. Yeah, I mean, that's really where, from my point of view, and my advice is, and I always say to commenters, as I've said earlier this evening, that I don't like to hear commentators saying, go and educate that officer, go and tell them that what's wrong, and you need to tell them and stand up and do this and do that. And I sit there and I think, okay, that's all very well and good, but if you're in a situation where we've seen, like, for instance, the Michigan story that I covered with Jason Harrison, probably nearly 2 years ago now, originally, showing his arrest, a Part 107 pilot flying over Park, and they tried to use some ordinance about aircraft descending or descending directly over the park and this type of thing against him, and actually arrested him and seized his equipment. And, you know, you are unfortunately going to, especially in the US, where you have all these different types of police and all these different types of departments, etc., that have put the police symbol or similar law enforcement emblazoned upon them. You are going to have very differing views of professionalism. You're going to have very differing levels of competency, and yeah, I think it is a real issue, certainly. And Drone Shot saying he was not even close. And that's the thing. I don't know whether, again, when you read the penal code for this, I just don't know whether I feel that this is something which enters that higher echelon of issue, frankly, of this staircase. So, when they're acting recklessly, engaging in conduct which creates a substantial risk of serious physical injury to another person, I just don't know how far across that line I think that this hits. But I also want to make sure, as my parting comment on this particular story, that we are aware everywhere in the world that it isn't just air regulation that we're going to be subjected to as time goes on. And I think the more and more drones are out there, the more and more drones are being flown around people, we're going to see more and more situations like this where drone operators can and will be prosecuted for regulations, for laws that are absolutely nothing to do with it. And Paul, we will leave the last word to you, actually, the pilot himself. They take away from all of this that education is needed on both sides. I've learned from this, but the cops need to also. And I do agree with you there, Paul. And it's because of your attitude that I knew that I could do this kind of show. It's because I know that you're not some reckless buffoon that I would be able to both call you out and support you in the same show. And really, everybody, that really is Paul Wedge and Big's deal, really, frankly. That's the attitude that I've seen in his live shows and everything else on his channel. Excellent. Well, that's it for this evening. Thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate it. This is a very difficult topic. Please remember there is a guy and his family in the middle of this. So if you can give via the Just Giving page, please do so. So I'm just laughing at Andy Cortez saying, why did you look at me when you said buffoon? I'm always looking at you when I think of a buffoon, Andy. Yeah, we'll be back actually with quite a big DJI story during the week. We've got another couple of videos coming up from our series in collaboration with the MPCC drone team. Am I saying too many C's there? MPCC, no. MPCC drone team as well, so keep an eye out for those. I look forward to the fruity comments that may come up on those. Thank you everybody for being honest. Thank you everybody for approaching this topic in exactly the way that I love the Geeksvana audience does. You guys are always open, you're always honest with your views, and this way we all get to learn. This way we all get to move forward as a hobby and an industry. Thank you. I'll see you next time on Geeksvana.